Alrighty, folks. Good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you are in the world. Uh, Before we get started, I want to just thank Isaac for getting all of this set up. I think that this has been really great, and especially across all the time slots that's available to people everywhere. To start off, just a quick bit of introduction and overview. Hi, my name is Jonah Kellman. I'm a level 3 from Western Massachusetts. Right now, I have some thunder and lightning and a fan going on, so please let me know if you can't hear me. But it seems like folks are picking me up, so that's good. So tonight, we're going to be talking about self-evaluation, tools and techniques, how to get better at it. Self-evaluation is something that's important to me because I always am striving to improve myself. And I am the person who sees most of what I do, more so than literally anybody else. And so I'm able to get a bigger picture than anybody else. Throughout this presentation, please feel free to drop a message in Discord. I have it open, so I can keep an eye on that. I'd love to have your questions so I can answer them in real time or as close to real time as possible. I prefer to deviate from more lecture-y things, but the online format, what with lag, makes it a little bit harder to interact directly with all of you. At some points, I may ask for feedback directly or ask questions to you and wait for your answers. So we're going to see how that works out for us. So self-evaluation is one of the harder things to do. It's both tricky and it can be scary. Part of what you are doing is trying to figure out what you're doing wrong and how to stop it. And if it doesn't work, if you're not able to figure out what you need to do to improve, you can easily get disheartened. You might scare yourself off from proceeding further, or you might be wrong in your evaluation and hair off in the wrong direction and not work towards what you need to be working towards. So I'm going to talk about what self-evaluation is, give you some examples, and then some tools that I use to evaluate myself and tools that I've given to others and talk to others about so that they can improve their own self-evaluation. So self-evaluation is, for me, what I do when I'm trying to go to sleep. It's that thing that you do when you're lying awake at 1 or 2 in the morning and you're like, oh, last week I really screwed that up. That sucked. And then you just spiral for a while and you ruminate about everything you've done wrong in your life. And then you think back to 2nd grade, that one time when you really embarrassed yourself. That's self-evaluation. It's not necessarily the most effective thing. But any sort of consideration, berating yourself is self-evaluation. It's not the best or healthiest self-evaluation, but it is self-evaluation. It isn't something that you have to like sit down and say, I am going to evaluate myself today. You don't have to be writing a self-review. You don't have to be like writing a report to one of your friends being like, this is what I am doing today. It can just be like, oh, I could have done that a little better. Or it can also be positive. It can be like, that was really good. I answered that ruling smoothly, or I recognized that I was about to make a mistake, and so I corrected myself before I gave an incorrect ruling. It's also important to note that self-evaluation is not solo evaluation. Self-evaluation is evaluating yourself, but same as if you were giving feedback to some other person, you could ask a mutual friend for more information. If you are giving feedback on your team lead or somebody who works at your LGS, you can talk to somebody else who is on that team or talk to another staff member at your LGS and get more feedback. Similarly, with self-evaluation, you can talk to other people to gather feedback on yourself. That's still you evaluating yourself. It's not something you have to do alone. And that's something that I see a lot of people doing. They see self-evaluation, they think it's supposed to be by themselves, and then they get stuck because they're missing something. And asking for help, going to other people is very important in improving yourself. So, what are some examples? I really rocked it today. A vague feeling about performance counts as self-evaluation. If you recognize yourself having a vague feeling of today was good or today was bad, think about why it was good. It could be, I got pairings out quickly every time. I didn't get any rulings wrong to the best of my knowledge. The players were happy. People thanked me. You'd be like, it didn't feel good because I flubbed that one ruling at the beginning of the day, but the rest of the day was smooth, but it still didn't feel good because of that first moment. And it can be things not of value, not related directly to your task. It can be like somebody was just like, hey, that judge shirt is looking spiffy on you today. And you're like, all right, that made me feel good. That made my event. Self-evaluation can be short notes. This can be a little bit more objective. You can just be like, I missed this call, so I need to focus on intervening if triggers because that's something that I missed today. And you can just write that down. You can apply that to tests or quizzes on Judge Academy. You can go through a lesson and just be like, I missed that, I forgot about that, and just write that down. That's self-evaluation. It can be discussion with somebody you worked with. It doesn't have to be another judge even. You can talk with players at your local store. You can talk with players at larger events when we start going back to those in the next few months, hopefully. You can say, this is how I perceived my actions today. Can you confirm or deny my perception? And we'll get into that a little bit more about how those discussions work out. And it can be a full-blown self-review where you evaluate yourself on a variety of qualities over a long period of time or for an individual event, and you write it down and have something solid and concrete and lengthy that you can refer to later. So those are some examples of self-evaluation. Moving on to how to self-evaluate. This is going to be a quick overview of a bunch of approaches that I've used and thought about. A lot of these are somewhat contradictory. There's a lot of going in opposite directions, and that's because it's important to get multiple perspectives on things. What I'm going to talk about today is looking at both objective evaluation and subjective evaluation. I'm going to talk about evaluating yourself from a perspective of optimism and from a perspective of pessimism. We're going to talk about dealing with various perspectives outside of simply just optimism and pessimism, but from the perspective of other people, players, staff members, other judges, people that you work with, people that you interact with. We're going to talk about goal-oriented evaluation, talking about what you want out of your evaluation, what you want out of judging, and figuring out how you're approaching your goals. And then we're going to talk a little bit about outside influences and internal influences. Before we move on, though, I do want to talk a little bit about something called types of feedback. Joe might have talked about this in the previous session in this same track. If it's not new to you, great reinforcement. And if it is new to you, even better. I have found are about 3 types of general feedback: coaching, evaluation, and appreciation. Appreciation is just good feelings, positive vibes, being like, this person did really good, I did really good, that task was done well. Just sheer appreciation. That's nice, positive feedback. evaluation compares you to a benchmark. This was slower than it should have been. This wasn't as precise as it could have been. This is if you want to advance above or below what we expect for that level. And then there's coaching where somebody gives you guidance. It's like, these are the steps you need to take to improve in your deck checking. These are the steps that you need to take if you want to start team leading. It's important for you to realize what type of feedback you're looking for when you're evaluating yourself. Because if you're looking for coaching, if you're looking for what steps to take, and somebody gives you evaluation, just says, you're not quite at the bar, you're like, yes, I know, that's why I'm coming to you for feedback, tell me what to do. Or if you're looking for coaching and somebody says appreciation, gives you appreciation, they're like, great job today. You're like, that doesn't give me anything to work with. Keep in mind what you're trying to do with this feedback. And even just say, this is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for comparison to a benchmark. I'm looking for steps towards my next goal. Or I'm just looking for a pat on the back for something that I did well today. Most of the time you do want to mix. There are very few people who don't appreciate appreciation. But coaching and evaluation are always critically important, and you will get farther if you get a little bit more. So moving on to exploring motivations, because this is where we should start, in my opinion. Everyone has some sort of motivation. Why did you start judging? This is a question for the room. Why do you continue to judge? For myself, I became a judge. I certified, almost 6 years ago now, to prove to myself that I could. Why did I advance to level 2? To prove to myself that I could. Why did I advance to level 3? To prove to myself that I could. Once I got there, there weren't more levels. So why do I continue to judge? And I found that even at level 3, there's a lot of room for improvement. And so to me, it continues to be in that same thing, but it is to continue to prove to myself that I can. Before we're able to start analyzing why we do what we do and how we act, we need to know why we did it. I often see these motivations as personal and selfish. It's not necessarily bad that it is a personal goal. You could be seeking respect or outwards acceptance within your community. You could have started judging for the money. That probably wasn't correct, but okay. If you can figure out why you do things, it can help you either do them more in the future or not do them in the future. If you became a judge for respect from others, to prove to other people how smart you are and how well you know the rules, maybe you get a little bit braggy and people kind of just feel uncomfortable when you're like, well, actually, all the time. If you did it for outwards acceptance within the community and you're trying to ingratiate yourself, maybe you are try to be the cool judge who lets things slide maybe a little bit too much. Maybe let your people that you're trying to get to appreciate you and to accept you, let them have takebacks that you really shouldn't let them have. These are things that were minor motivations for myself. And noticing those motivations helped me realize the actions and then move forward from those actions. For Hank, seeing a need and believing that you can feel it, that's community oriented, but part of that is because you want the community to still exist. Again, this is personal philosophy saying that it is selfishly based. But that, to me, sounds like you are very community driven. And so that means you'd be putting yourself in positions where you might be sacrificing something for yourself to help improve the community. And that might mean working an event that underpays you, and that damages the community in the long term. Not necessarily something that you did, but that's something that you can learn from that motivation. Just waiting a second to see what Hank has to say, because I saw you typing, and gives me a chance to drink some water. Exactly, yeah. Um, it's selfish in that if the community doesn't exist, you can't play at all, as opposed to a mix. And that's definitely a motivation for many judges, especially in more remote areas where, particularly during the times of PPTQs, if you wanted to have competitive events, you needed to be a certified judge. You needed somebody there. And some people became judges just so that their stores would have events. And again, that can lead to potentially poor behavior or potentially good behavior. But it gives you more information from which you can start your evaluation. Which leads us to our analysis, starting with objective analysis. You deal with facts and examine controlled environments. So dealing with facts, you can, of course, use information from tests and quizzes to find out what knowledge you lack. You can take tests on Judge Academy or look at questions on Rules Guru. You can go to the various Magic Discords or other servers, Slacks, whatever, where people are asking rules questions, Facebook, what have you. And you can either participate in answering those questions or just be a spectator, see the questions asked, answer them yourself quietly, and then compare to the answer that is given. You can compare that to the rules and say, did I get this right? Do I have this knowledge of the rules or the jar or the IPG? Those are facts, and you can say, okay, triggers are something that I need to work on. When I was preparing for level 2, I took a handful of practice tests, and I noted down which category of rules each question I got wrong was in. A third of the questions I got wrong were because I can't read, just missing a card or missing an important word like may. A third of the questions were miscellaneous, just no connection to each other. And a third of the questions that I got wrong were about triggers. And so before I took my level 2 test, I sat down and read the section in the rules on triggers a couple of times. And I asked my mentors and my friends, ask me questions about triggers. First question on the test was a question about triggers that I got wrong, but we're going to ignore that. The rest of the test, we passed it. So we got better with triggers. You can also look at other facts that seem a little bit softer. If you're team leading, or even as a member of a team, did your team accomplish its tasks? If you're doing a deck check, did I perform the deck check in a reasonable amount of time? When I answered the call, did I look at the clock to see how much time was left in the round so that I could give a proper time extension? These are all factual things, true or false, or measurable. It's something that you can compare to an expectation very easily. It also helps when you're working in controlled environments. So again, the Slacks and the Discords and the Facebook channels, where you can see the entirety of the environment. On the floor of an event, maybe you're doing a midnight pre-release and you also worked an extra hour at work, and so it's a 9-hour day, and then you stayed up late and now it's 3 a.m. And yes, you did objectively get that question wrong, but a midnight pre-release isn't the most controlled environment. In that case, we're not looking at a lack of knowledge, but a lack of sleep. Or if it's a larger event, maybe it's your first competitive event, it's nerves. Maybe you're taking on a new role for the first time. You're working on an end of round team, or you're working on deck checks team, and you have that distraction in the back of your mind. Take you can evaluate those as those are objective changes. It's easier though to look at these questions in more controlled environments, on tests, on paper. That's where you can see where your knowledge is and where these facts are. It's easy to find out if you don't know the correct penalty for a limited procedure violation. You can just check the IPG. It's a lot harder to figure out if you need to work on how you hold yourself, how you position your body when talking to players. There's no rule book for that. There's guidance handed down the generations, but it's not objective. And looking at yourself objectively gives you a bunch of benchmarks that you can work towards. Of course, there's also subjective analysis, which is everything that isn't the rules and the IPG and things that are measurable. This is a lot trickier. And many of the things that we're going to talk about in the next few sections, like optimism and pessimism and people's perspectives, are heavily, heavily subjective. We might dip a bit into pseudopsych and pop science and thinking about thinking. We can't be sure about everything. Human brains are very complex. But when we start looking into subjective analysis, we need to keep in mind that looking at things from different angles is important. Our minds lie to us very frequently. We all know that when we talk to a player who hasn't made a decision in 3 minutes, they think it's been about 15 seconds. Our minds will lie to us constantly. And so when you're looking at yourself subjectively, it can be very difficult. You can feel like you got the pairings out too late, but if you don't look at the hard numbers, you don't actually know. If you're looking for atmosphere, how did people enjoy the event? Did they have fun? Are the players feeling good about your participation in the event? That's hard to separate from how well they're doing in the event. They have other things that are going on that are impacting their enjoyment and their positivity. There's not something that you can directly look at. When you're evaluating these subjective things, don't worry about being wrong. While being wrong, of course, isn't the goal, you're going to misevaluate things. The more experience you gather and the more angles you approach from, the better you get at analyzing these softer things. So now, optimism. How many of you would say that you're an optimist? You generally think positive thoughts. And how many of you would say that you're a pessimist? I'm interested in some responses from the group. And we're going to pretend that it's a binary and that there isn't a line for realists and all that sort of thing. I like to think I'm a realist, but what that means is I'm a pessimist who wants to be an optimist. I think the worst, but I'm like, I really wish it wasn't going to be terrible, but it's going to be terrible. That's my version of realism. I know other people are the inverse. They think everything's going to be all right, but they worry about the worst. When you're evaluating, you should always try to filter for optimism and look through a lens that finds something that has gone right. Something has to have gone right. Exactly, Hank. A pessimist is what an optimist calls a realist. But there is always something that's gone right. Even in the worst events, when everything is burning down and it's an absolute dumpster fire, at least I figured out that it was a dumpster fire, and I'm not oblivious to that. Something has gone right. Simply having a positive mind frame and finding things that have gone well can make you feel better and happier. Forcing yourself to find the positives from an event can, if you find one thing, you can be like, well, okay, I also managed to do these other things despite these challenges that I faced. Staying hopeful and looking for the good will get you to find other things. So if you're generally more pessimistic, more critical of yourself, try and find the good things. Make sure that you have a strong basis. Know that you can say, this is something that I'm going to repeat. An important part of feedback, as I'm confident Joe mentioned previously, is telling people when they do something good and do something correctly, telling them that that was good and that was correct and that they should keep on doing that. If you just give critical feedback, people are like, okay, I can't do that, I can't do that, I can't do that, I can't do that. And they just slowly stop doing anything. But if you're like, keep on doing that and keep on doing that, even to yourself, you will hopefully continue to do those good things. Of course, if you're overly positive, you can easily, very easily, miss things that go wrong. I cannot keep track of the number of times when I felt great that I was rocking an event, nailing rules questions left and right. Players are having a great time. I'm having a great time. And somebody's like, hey, what about those pairings that you were supposed to take down? And I'm like, oh, right, those. So there is a risk to being too positive, but that is why we filter with pessimism. There we go. Always look for things that could have gone better, like that transition. It can be, as I mentioned, dangerous to be too optimistic. Be wary of buying into a myth of perfection. If somebody's like, yeah, you did great, everything was perfect. That's not true. There were things that could have gone better. You're not perfect, so don't think that you are. And very frequently, our strengths are highlighted publicly. People congratulate us on our successes when we advance in levels or meet new goals. If we head judge our first event or go to our first large competitive event, we're congratulated, which is a great thing. But weaknesses and areas of improvement are generally private. It's generally not as in the open, and so it's easier to just push it off to the side, push that critical feedback under the rug. And it's important to look at that critical feedback, because you're not perfect. There is something that you can do better. Maybe it could just be a little bit faster. Maybe it could be a little bit more polite or welcoming in your stance or in the way that you give the ruling. Being critical, being a criticist, means that you're going to look for improvement everywhere. You're going to look for improvement in the things that you know you do poorly. You're going to look for improvement in the things that you think you do decently at. You're going to look for improvement in the ways other people give you feedback. So toss on a layer of pessimism. So once you filter for optimism and look for all the good things, and then you filter for pessimism and look for all the bad things, take a step back. You have a very warped perspective of your actions. You have the unique privilege, let's say, that you know the intention behind everything you did. Not everybody else knows what you're thinking, because not everybody else is a mind reader. This can cause defensive behavior or giving excuses. You might end up saying, I wasn't ignoring you, I was focusing on X, Y, and Z, To the person who you were ignoring, it sure looks like you were ignoring them. You can, instead of, take that perspective and accept it. Their perspective, even if it clashes with yours, even if theirs is a different reality, is valid. It is something that you should take into consideration. Appearances are very important, not just in judging, but in many, many things. If people think you're a jerk, then you're a jerk. Even if you're the nicest person in the world, if the perception is you're a jerk, that's how other people feel. If people think you're very nice and you're actually a jerk, hooray, you did it. When you are talking with somebody who has a difference in perspective from you, figure out where that different perspective came from. Maybe say, would the feedback change if I was doing XYZ? Give them that information to work with, and then they can say, okay, I understand why it looked like you were ignoring me, and that wasn't ideal. However, your task was more important than paying attention to me at the time, so it makes sense. Or they say, no, you were still ignoring me and I'm more important than whatever it was you're doing. When you step back, you may find that you're rejecting feedback or criticism just because you know what you did. You already understand it. They weren't there. They don't know. Take a step back and just say, okay, let's listen to what they have to say. Their information has some value, at the very least, as what was seen to happen. That perception to that other person or to those other people is their reality. They don't have the extra information that you do. Imagine when you're in one of these situations, somebody else doing whatever action you took. This is how I try to evaluate decisions that I make that I think might be poor. I'm like, if one of my friends was like, yeah, I was going to go do whatever, like, yeah, I thought it was a good idea to go hiking in the woods at midnight during a thunderstorm. I'd be like, okay, so that's dumb. And I'm probably not going to do that after this because it's midnight and there's a thunderstorm. But create a projection or think about one of your friends doing what you just did and evaluate that person as well. Stop looking at yourself as yourself and look at yourself as another person would look at you. I'm waiting for Samuel to finish something else. Yes, exactly. Everyone has their own truth. Their perspective is reality. That's one of my favorite phrases. Perspective is reality, because that opinion isn't an opinion. It's not what they think happened. It's what happened to them. And that difference is very important. Of course, you have knowledge that nobody else has. You know your intention, and you can take advantage of this perspective. You have all the information that you use to make your decision. You have all of the inputs that made you come to this conclusion. And nobody else has that. Nobody else has your experiences. Nobody else has the previous feedback that you've gotten from other people. Nobody else has the instructions that you were given unless they were also there. A suggestion here is, when you're evaluating yourself and when you're looking closer, when you are trying to figure out, was this a good decision or not, write down what you did, write down why you did it, put it away. And then come back, look at it, and read, what did I do? Evaluate that. Don't look at your intention. Don't look at why you did it. Just look at what your actions were. Evaluate it. And then look at why you did it. Look at your intentions and see if your intentions now, what you would do with this situation, matches what you actually did. You have this information that nobody else does, and it's very valuable for you to use. So far, most of this can be done on your own. The optimism, the pessimism, you can do that on your own. The stepping back and looking closer, it's a matter of creating a perspective, thinking about what it's like to be a player in an event, to get a game loss, or even to get a warning. I know that many judges don't see a warning as particularly harsh because it doesn't have a lasting impact unless a player accrues several warnings. But to players, it is very often much more dramatic than we expect it to be. It can ruin a player's day, and taking that perspective is something that you can do. However, you do want some outside influences. You should listen to what other people say, but you want to make your own judgments. You don't want to just be like, yes, my mentor said that I was very good at deck checks, so I'm very good at deck checks. They probably weren't there for all of them. My mentor says I'm bad at triggered abilities. They're not there all the time. They might not see you when you're getting these more complicated questions correctly. While you should be doing the majority of the thinking, other people, and non-judges are people too, have useful thoughts. If you have a good relation with the players at your local store, if, for example, you have in the third or fourth round of F&M, when prizes are on the line, there's a weird or contentious ruling, active player said, non-active player said sort of situation. If you have a good relationship with the players, maybe later that night or the next week at the next F&M, after tempers or feelings have had a chance to subside, you can ask them for feedback on what you could have done better to make the experience better for them. This is a perspective that they have that you don't. This ties into the stepping back and potentially the optimism and pessimism, because if it sucked for them, if they were ruled against, they're probably going to be a little bit more pessimistic about it. And if they were ruled in favor, probably going to be a little bit more optimistic about it. It's also a lot easier to watch somebody else do something and evaluate them on it than it is to do something yourself and evaluate yourself on it. When you're watching somebody else, you're just doing that one thing. If you're trying to complete a task and you are attempting to evaluate yourself, you're trying to do two things at the same time. It's important to also compare your perspective to that of outsiders and see where the differences lie. One of my friends, Eric Aliff, called me complacent when I was starting my press towards L3, and I didn't see it. I thought that I was trying to push myself further and harder, and because I was pushing for the next great thing. And Eric had a lot of great points about me just trying to coast there. Io Hudo called me quiet, and I was like, yeah, I'm quiet, but I'm not that quiet. And she pointed out all of the areas in which I was quiet and more reserved. Another friend called me approachable, and I was like, that's not true. I don't like people. I can't be approachable. I still don't think I'm approachable, but that's not something that I am in a good position to judge. I don't determine how easy it is to spend time with me, because I spend time with me literally all the time. But it was useful feedback, and I was able to incorporate it into my evaluation of myself. I'm going to pause here for the couple folks who are typing, and then we'll move on to the next slide. I've got about 10 or 11 minutes left and just a couple more slides, so we're on track. That's true. It is not about how much I like people. It's about how I show it. I can be very charming. I didn't say that. Anyways. Goals and benchmarking. One of the things that you should do when you are evaluating yourself is figure out what makes you learn. For some people, goals help you learn. For some people, challenges do. For some people, shame and disappointment from their friends makes them learn. Not talking from personal experience. Have benchmarks. Benchmarks, challenges, and goals can be very similar, but goals are a thing that you want to do in a time frame. Some of you may have heard of SMART goals, which are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time limited. They're a to-do list with a timer on them, and it's very clear on what you want to do. Challenges are similar to goals, except for me, they're things that I don't know if I can accomplish. They're stretch goals, things that make me push myself. They can be cooperative or they can be competitive. You can grab a friend and be like, hey, wonder who can do a deck check completely and accurately faster. And you have that little bit of a challenge going on. Who's on top of being at the printer when you need to cut slips for your pre-release? Who gets them out faster? You just swap off each round and see who can get the slips out neatly faster. You can gamify things a little bit, and games are something that I hope most of us enjoy, and hope maybe games motivate you. Benchmarks are just ways to compare your progress. Taking tests and writing reviews is a good way to see where you were objectively. This is tying back into that objective evaluation. While you can use reviews that you receive to evaluate yourself, you can guarantee that you have benchmarks by reviewing yourself. One of the things that I've done over my career as a judge is from, I think my first review that I wrote for myself covering the qualities of a level 3 judge was about 3 months after I hit level 2, which I believe is very aggressive. It took many years after writing that review to actually achieve it, but I had that benchmark where I thought I was. And then I wrote more reviews on those same qualities and saw how my evaluation changed. I saw the numerical difference in where I saw myself. My first self-review was very glowing. I thought I was the best thing since sliced bread. I wasn't then. I was a new level 2 judge. And I had a lot of room to grow. I was very competent. I was able to fill the role of a level 2 judge, as any tested level 2 judge is. But I thought I was ready for level 3 when I was absolutely not. And so my next review was a little bit more critical, and it was good for me to be able to look back and see where I thought I was and get a more realistic evaluation. There is a little bit of danger if you begin to backslide with benchmarks. You might start an avalanche and ruminate and fall into a pool that doesn't let you escape. So goals and challenges can motivate you. Benchmarks can give you information to help you, give you objective information on some things that might be a little bit more subjective. If you write about your interactions, about your ability to create a positive environment every few months, you have this hard set of facts, or at least your opinion over time, and you can see how that changes. And that's evidence. That's strong opinion, and that can turn subjective evaluation into objective evaluation. So writing self-reviews. It used to be a major part of the level 3 process. It is still important. It's been changed a little bit. But there isn't anything to be afraid of. You don't have to show anyone or put it on Judge Academy or submit it to anyone. You don't have to tell anybody you wrote it. You can even burn it later. I recommend not burning it, especially if it's on your computer, but you do you. Self-reviews should be for yourself. While self-evaluation is not solo evaluation, a self-review can and should be for you. You are the audience here. You're the person who's supposed to be learning from this. If you're not sure what to write about, look at the qualities for a level 3 judge. They're at a different scale, but they're the qualities that all judges should have in some amount. And hopefully now you're a little bit better at self-evaluation, one of those qualities. So that's nice. When you're looking at the qualities, if you want to evaluate on area of improvement or strength, keep in mind that you're not perfect. Grade yourself compared to your peers or where you are now or where you were a month ago. You don't have to say, I am good at this. You can say, I am better at this. And acknowledging that progress can be very important. Don't grade yourself against perfection. Don't look at whatever judge is the strongest in leadership and compare yourself to them, and then look at a different person who's strong in policy and compare yourself to them. There isn't anybody who is perfect, to the best of my knowledge, and it's foolish to compare yourself to them across the board. It is still good to strive, and if you like challenging yourself, if you're like, this is what I want to aim to be, you can use your peers and other judges as course setters. Just be like, I want to act more like this person. This person has inspired me. I want to learn from them. They do this very well. They're very impressive in the way that they're able to motivate their team after it's been a long day. That's really cool. That's something I want to do. You can guide yourself on somebody else, but you shouldn't judge yourself on that. So to start wrapping this up, use facts, be objective, but also be subjective. Be positive and always look for the good, but also make sure to always look for the bad. Step back and consider things from outside perspectives, but also step in and look closer and use your unique perspective of knowing what's going on inside your brain, or at least an idea of what's going on inside your brain. Get suggestions and feedback from other people, but also figure it out on your own. That's pretty much all there is to it. It's a bunch of mishmash things going in opposite directions, but take time to evaluate yourself, ask questions, and hopefully you'll get better. I believe in it. At this point, if anybody has any questions, I have about a minute or two left before we take our break and disperse, before I believe Mark Mason comes in here for Project Hope. And if there aren't any questions, well, thank you for listening. I hope you got something out of it. If you have questions later on, feel free to shoot me a message on Discord. If you can find me on Facebook, you should be able to find me through Judge Academy. Please feel free to reach out. I'm going to copy the link to this presentation into this Discord, so if anybody wants to go over these bullet points again, that's absolutely a possibility. And thanks for listening.